Hey everyone, welcome to this new series on user interface in Unity 2D. Today I'm going to just quickly cover some points about what is the user interface, what is it, what are we going to learn in this series, and just so you've got an idea of what we're going to cover. So what is user interface? UI stands for user interface, that is what it stands for, but there is a difference. There is UI and there is GUI. Now, as for Unity, we're going to be referring to GUI as UI. So in this series, we're covering UI/GUI. Now, GUI is graphical user interface. So it's the visual interface between a computer and a human. User interface can cover more than just graphics. It can be input and output devices, things like that. So it's a bit more broad, whereas GUI is specific to what we are doing, playing around with graphics to provide a graphical interface for humans to interact with the computer. GUI itself can come in many forms, being windows, icons, menus, buttons, panels. There's so many different forms that GUI can come in, just text. So with that in mind, what are we actually going to learn? Well, in this series we are going to cover the following fundamental objects, I'm going to call them in Unity 2D. Technically they're objects, most of them, but I'm not going to get into that. So we're going to cover the canvas, we're going to talk about what a canvas is, how do we change the properties of it, how do we customize it. We're going to talk about the event system, what does it do, what role does it play. We're going to cover images and raw images, what are they, how do we customize them, what's the difference. We're going to look at text, and we're going to look at TextMeshPro text. Now, these might sound really similar, but we're going to look at the difference between TextMeshPro and normal text. How do we use TextMeshPro? What are its benefits? We'll cover panels as well, and then basically all the scroll view properties such as toggles, sliders, scroll bars. We've also got scroll views in general. So we'll have a look at scroll views, which is basically all of those put together to make a panel, and then you can scroll it. We're looking at buttons. So what is a button? How do we assign events to buttons, be it script or other methods? We're going to look at drop downs. So like selection boxes, like you click a thing, it would bring a drop down menu. You can select different items. Look at input fields and how can we actually get the input, get the text from the input field and do anything with it. And we'll look at finally scroll rects, which are basically everything. Scroll view, the lot, all in one. And then we can have a nice panel with a list of items which we can scroll through. And that is what we're going to cover in this series. I just wanted to quickly go over all of this so everyone knows what's coming up. So to create a canvas, if we right click under any scene, and under UI you'll see we can add a canvas. Now with a canvas we have event systems as well. We're going to come back to those in the next video, but right now let's just click on canvas and we're going to focus on that. You'll see the event system comes over into our hierarchy when we create the canvas as well. We're just going to ignore it. Don't delete it because then your canvas, all your UI elements won't work. More on that next time. So now if we click the canvas and hit F on our keyboard, it's going to sort of zoom us out to it. And there's a few cool properties here in the inspector. So under the canvas you'll see we have the render mode. So by default it's set to screen space overlay. And this basically means that UI elements are layered on top of the screen. So if you have like an image let's say you add an image to your UI, to your canvas, that image is going to be overlaid on top of all the other objects in the game. So say you got a 3D game, that UI is always going to be above everything. Next you see if we click on this we have screen space camera. This is quite similar, but this just means that the canvas is placed a given distance in front of the camera or the given camera. So this means that the camera settings will affect the appearance of the UI. So you can see I can add a render camera here. So if I drag in our main camera as our render camera, then we can, any settings that we have in our camera will affect the way our user interface appears. So basically, UI is displayed via the camera. So if we add an image into our canvas, you'll see the image, rather than having a massive canvas like we did a minute ago, all the UI is actually here within the camera space. So whatever the size of the camera is, the UI is affected. So if we change the size of this camera here, you'll see the UI is getting affected by the size of the camera, which reflects here as well under our display. As we change the size of the camera, the size of the image is changing. It is changing, but because it's all relative, we don't see it until it goes to a negative size. But that will change based on the camera settings. But now we can delete that. Let's go back to our canvas, and next you'll see we have world space. Now, this one's slightly different to both the others. This is where the canvas actually behaves as an object. You may be wondering, what does that mean? Now, in simple terms, it means the UI is going to render behind or in front of other objects that are based on 3D placement. So say you have a square, or a cube, sorry. I'm not going to add 3D objects now, but say you have a cube at the front of the screen, if you imagine a 3D space, and then behind this cube you have a UI panel or an image, and then behind that image you have another cube. The cube at the front is going to overlap the UI, and then the cube behind you won't be able to see because the UI is in the way, if that makes sense. It basically allows you to have user interface that blends in with the world space, which is great for 3D games. You wouldn't use this on a 2D game, or you could use it on a 2D game, but it's less often that you would expect it to be used on a 2D game. You'd normally only see it in 3D games. Okay, I'm just going to go back to our overlay screen space because this is probably the most common one that people would use. Let's talk about pixel perfect. That literally it's an on or off, it's true or false, and it just forces elements in the canvas to be aligned with pixels, which basically it makes elements appear sharper, it prevents blurriness. However, it's important to note that if elements are scaled or rotated or animated, it can make the transition unsmooth. So if you're trying to sharpen it by making it pixel perfect, if you are animating it, rotating it, scaling it, it can come out a bit unsmooth and not too nice to the eye. So it's not always a good idea. This is probably best to put on static elements which aren't going to move. If you have elements which are quite animated, then you might not want to have pixel perfect enabled. Okay, the sort order, that is the order the elements are displayed. So elements of a higher order are going to be displayed over elements of a lower order, basically. So say we have an image of order 1. I can actually show this one. If we create an image, and this canvas order the sort order is going to be 1, and we have a image here with a red color. If we then duplicate this canvas and have an image with a blue color, because sometimes you'll have more than one canvas in a game, you'll see if we then change this sort order to be 0, we can't see it. But if we make it 2, so it's above the other canvas's sort order, you'll see we can see it because they're overlapping. So if we now move this image, you'll see as we change the sort order of both of these, so if we make this one 3, you'll see we can just change the order the canvases are displayed. Okay, so next we have the target display. This is the display that the canvas is going to be rendered into. So if we go under game here, you can see we have multiple displays. You have to have cameras rendering different displays, but we can set this canvas to target display 4. And if we go to display 4, we won't see anything because there's no cameras, but we can just basically specify what display we want a canvas to target. And this is good with, like, if you have a game which is going to run on multiple screens or things like that, this would be useful. I mean, I don't know why there's 8 displays. I guess for some reason you might need that. I don't know. But it just allows you to render UI on different displays. Next, we have additional shader channels. We're going to leave these out because these get quite advanced, and I want to keep things as simple as I can. I don't want to confuse you with too much information, so we're going to leave that out, and we're also going to leave out vertex color always in gamma space or gamma color space, because these things get quite advanced. We don't need to include them, and nor do you really need to use them. I mean, if you're using shaders, then you might play around with these. Next, we're going to talk about the canvas scaler. So we have UI scale mode. Now, constant pixel size, this means elements are always displayed at their given size. Say we have an image of 100 by 100, it's going to be displayed at that pixel size. The scale factor is the multiplier of how much larger the elements are displayed compared to their given size. So if it's 100 by 100 and the scale factor is 2, it's going to be displayed at 200 by 200. Pretty simple. And reference pixels per unit, this is how many pixels are displayed per unity unit. Now, once again, I'm not going to get too involved with this, but a unity unit is basically, it's like a set amount of distance. So, like 1 unity unit, you think, from one square to another, it's basically a distance that unity make. It can be anything. It's not like it's not got a set unit. It's just a unity unit. So you can basically make it anything, but we're not going to talk about it too much. Next, let's go to scale with screen size. You'll see that we get a few more settings. Now, scale with screen size is where the elements are always displayed at different sizes based on the screen size. So the reference resolution, we basically want this to be the resolution of the screen that the canvas should reference. So say we're playing let's say we're playing 1920 by 1080, we want this reference resolution to ideally be 1920 by 1080, and then the screen match mode is how you want the elements to scale. So we can have them match the width or height, we can expand the elements to that size or shrink them, and the match, this is sort of like the ratio of width to height. I always keep this at 0.5 because it's right there in the middle, but you can play around with these as you create UI. Okay, last but not least, constant physical size. Now, constant physical size, this is where elements are positioned and sized in physical units, such as millimeters. So as I was saying a minute ago, we know that unity units don't have specific units. However, we can have physical sizes such as centimeters, millimeters, inches, points, and picas. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that last one. I don't know how you pronounce that, but I don't even know what that is, to be honest. Okay, so apparently that is about roughly 1/6 of a foot or something, or an inch, I can't remember. Yeah, no idea what that is, but there you go. We're going to leave out all the DPIs because these are a bit advanced. They're basically dots per inch. It's the number of, I believe it's the number of pixels that are referenced per inch, but I wouldn't go by that because I'm not 100% sure myself. I don't really play around with the physical units or constant physical size. The only one I use is scale with screen size, so I wouldn't really play around with these. And the graphics raycaster we're going to leave out once again because we're talking about raycasting here. It's a bit more advanced. We're not going to get too advanced because I don't want to confuse you. I want to keep things as simple as I can while still covering everything you sort of need as a starter. So that is it for the canvas. There is a lot to take in, but what I recommend is going around, creating your own canvas, just add some images in there, and even though we've not covered those yet, you don't have to play around with the properties of the image itself, but you can just add some elements and play around with the canvas settings, see what different things you can get, and just play around with it, and then over time you'll sort of start learning and remembering what each thing is. So when we right clicked last episode and added a canvas, we saw that the event system was automatically dragged into the hierarchy, but what actually is the event system? So if we click on it here, we've got a bunch of different things. We're not going to worry about the standalone input module today. This is to do with inputs and things, which we're just going to leave this for now because it gets a bit advanced. Input system's sort of a different thing. It can't really be covered in this video because it covers a lot. There's quite a lot to the input systems. You've got the new input system, the old input system. They sort of require their own little mini sets of videos to cover everything, so we're going to leave that for now. If anyone wants a little series on the input systems, let me know. We can probably make it work, but for now we're going to focus on the event system. So just to leave the input module, that'll update anyway. If you change your input system, it'll all get updated. So first of all, the event system, what is it? It is what it's called. It's basically the system of events. It manages all the events, so mouse clicks, things like that. So if a UI element is clicked, the event system is what is dealing with the event. So first selected, this just specifies which user interface element should be initially selected when appearing on the canvas. So if we create a, let's create 2 buttons. Going to create one button here. Ignore all this because we've not covered TextMeshPro yet. We're going to get to that. So we've got a button here, and we're going to duplicate it and put a button down here. And if we hit play, you're going to see that both these buttons just stay white. If a button is selected, it changes to a darker color. If we now go to the event system and change the first selected to button 1, the bottom one is going to start by being selected when we run the game. You'll see it's a slightly different color. You can see sort of when we hover over it, it fades. If I just make it a completely different color to be obvious, so selected color I'm going to just put to red, and same with the first button as well. And now as we press play, the bottom button should be red because it's selected by default. And obviously I've just clicked off of it, but you can see that by default it starts being it's first selected, that's quite simple. That's all the first selected is. It's just when you first load the canvas, what element do you want to be selected, if any. Next you've got send navigation events. This is just a true or false value, which basically it says should the system allow navigation events. So that is things such as moving, submitting, cancelling. Most of the time you're going to have this on, but if you've got something where you don't want navigation events, then you can disable them. Of course, by navigation events we're talking about user interface navigation and things like that. We're not talking about like character navigation, 3D navigation. That's a different sort of thing. That's dealing more with the input of a character and the player movement, if that makes sense. Character movement. This is purely for the user interface. The drag threshold, this is basically the soft area for dragging in pixels. So if the higher you have this, the higher the sort of soft area is going to be if you're dragging an object. I don't really play around with this because I don't really have to, but if you've got objects where you need to drag them and things like that, obviously the higher the number, the greater the threshold, so there's going to be more sort of leeway. That's all there really is to the event system. There's not really too much to say. If there's one thing you need to take away from this video, it is that the event system is what captures events. So mouse clicks, things like that. The event system is what deals with these. If you don't have an event system, so say we have buttons, let's get our 2 buttons back. If we don't have an event system, you're going to notice we can't click the buttons, we can't do anything with them, because we have no way of detecting mouse clicks. So basically the event system is just a way of detecting inputs from the user. So I hope this video helped everyone. It was quite basic. I know I didn't really go into much detail, much explaining, but there's not much to talk about with the event system. First selected, that's quite straightforward. What element is selected? Navigation events, do you want to send navigation events, so like moving, submitting, things like that. Do you want to send them or not? Pretty straightforward. And drag threshold, that's a bit more like that's playing around. That's sort of something you have to play around with yourself to discover. You can't really demonstrate it with words. Obviously it's going to be different you've got to adjust it to your liking for your project, whatever your game is, whatever. That's not something that you can give a set value on and be like, yes, this works universally for everyone. I tend to keep mine at 10. I think it used to be 5, but it's been changed to 10. I just leave it as that. I've never had to deal with that anyway, but if you've got something where you might have to play around with that, you just play around with the values and see what creates the best effect. So what is the difference between a raw image and a normal image? Well, a raw image can display any texture, whereas an image is bound to just a sprite. So I will show you what we mean by this a little bit later on, but if you focus your attention down to the assets at the moment, it's currently under the scenes folder, which isn't ideal. I'll just put that in the assets folder. You'll see I've got a little image called design. It's literally a white box with a bit of a transparent area and then a black border around it. You can see here it is. It's nothing special. It's just a quick design I made just to demonstrate a couple of the settings we're going to play around with today. Now you'll see it's come in as a default on the texture type, and you've got loads of these different options. I'm not going to go through all of these. We're going to focus on default and sprite. But for now, we'll come back to that. let's just get on with the image. So for the image, we're going to right click under UI, we are going to hit image, and this is going to first of all give us our canvas and event system, which we covered in the last 2 videos, and we're going to get this image here. I'm going to just drag this image to the middle of the screen. Let's have a little look at the image component. So you'll see we have a source image. Now this is the sprite that you want the image to display. Now notice it has to be a sprite. My little image I've got down here, my design image, if I drag that into the source image, it won't work. That is because the design has to be a sprite. If I make this texture type, if I click on my image in the assets folder and make the texture type a sprite and then hit apply, now the image will be a sprite, and I'll be able to go to the image that we've just created and drag it into the source image. And now we've just turned our little white block into the asset we already have in our project. Now there's quite a few different options here. The first thing I'm going to start by saying is set native size, because it's the easiest one. Say we've stretched this, like it's really weird, and we click set native size. That's going to set the width and height of the image to the width and height of the original raw design. So say we're making our image 317 by 90, and the actual image I think is 87 by 90. If we hit set native size, it sets it to 87 by 90. It's a good way of resetting back to the original size of your image. Now let's talk about the color. The color is basically an overlay that's whacked on top of your image, and it changes the color of it. So if I make this red, we're going to get a red color overlay. Obviously this bit between the black and the white is transparent, just because I wanted to demonstrate how transparency works as well. And if we make this red, you'll see only the white bit becomes red, the black doesn't become red, and that is because you are putting a color overlay on the top. You aren't pasting a new color entirely, replacing everything, otherwise it would all be one color, it would look horrible. You're just adding a contrast to it. So if this was, say, grey, it would go a bit red, like maybe a dark red, but it wouldn't go fully red. So say this was purple, you'd get a mix of purple and red, which I couldn't tell you what colour that makes. My colour theory is not great. And we can just play around with the colour here. So I'm going to leave that at white. As for the material, this is if you want to put a material on the image. So if we right click in our assets, we can create a material, and we can apply this material to the image. This is going to overlay on top of what we've done, and you get some weird funky looking designs. But if you play around with your material, you'll be able to create different things. So let's I'm going to get red here. You see the red is sort of only in the middle where our white is, because this material is being applied to our image. We can change the metallicness of it, the smoothness of it. I mean, just change the way that our material is appearing. Now I'm going to remove that material, and let's talk about raycast target. Now if this is turned on, the image will be clickable. What I mean by that is you'll be able to click the image and do something with it. If this is turned off, that means that any raycasts will pass through the image to whatever is behind the image. So in a 3D workspace, if you have like a square behind this image, or a cube, sorry, behind this image, and you click the image, if raycast target's turned off, the raycast is going to go through the UI to the cube, and you'll basically be clicking the cube through the image. So this is good if you want like non-clickable user, so things like name tags. If you want like a name tag, you don't want the user to be able to click that and let it get in the way, you'll turn off raycast target. Raycast padding is basically the area, I'm sure you might be familiar with padding, but it's basically the area of that's the raycast effects. It's the interactable area of the image. So if we put this in like 10 from the side, 10 from the bottom and the top, the clickable area is going to be a lot less than the actual area of the image. So anything within this green box, raycasts will hit. Anything out will not affect the image. We're going to skip over maskable because I'm not actually sure it does much. Because masks are separate components. Basically, masking allows you to get, if you have two objects, like one object is a child of another, the child object, if it's masked, it won't be able to go outside of the parent object, if that makes sense. If I quickly demonstrate that, if I add a mask here, and quickly duplicate this image and put it inside of this one. I can actually remove the mask on this image. There we go. So now the child image will not appear outside of the mask, out of the parent image. And that's what mask is. Let's talk about image type. So simple, the image appears how it is. You expand it, it gets stretched. If you click preserve aspect ratio, that will literally preserve the aspect ratio of the sprite, so it will avoid stretching it. After simple, we have sliced. Sliced is where the image is sliced within the border. My image doesn't actually have a border, but if it did, anything like if the image goes bigger, it will just be sliced and won't fit in the image. You can change the pixels per unit multiplier on that as well. As for tiled, this basically, if I put this at 2, tiled is basically a pattern. It fills the area with multiples of the image. It's quite cool. It's good if you want a pattern. So say this is one pattern part. My pixel per unit multiplier, depending on what that is, will depend on how many of the images appear. So if I put this at 2, there will be 4 images, 3 there will be 9, 4 there will be 16. It's basically the pixels, the number of images that are displayed is going to be pixels per unit multiplier squared, basically. So I put that at 2, we get 4 images, 3 we get 9, and you can see we can create some cool tile patterns here. If you put a decimal number, so like 2.5, 2.5 squared is 6.25, and I get 6.5 images, which if we count it up, I think's right. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, those two make 5, those two make 6, and 6.25. Yeah, so that works. That you get the right number of images, and of course, the bigger I make this all depends on the width and height and like the original size of it. But as I expand it, it just creates more and more. But the pixel per unit multiplier goes off the original image size, and like the pixels per unit of that. As for filled, the image is just going to get filled, so we can change the fill amount, and it's sort of, you can get cool little shapes. I don't know. This is good if you want like timers, things like that. You can change the fill method to be horizontal, and it will go from left to right. Change its starting position. You can go vertical, and you can just change the fill amount, and this can be changed in script too. Anyway, I'm going to leave that as simple for now, and we're going to move on. Now let's talk about our raw image. So what is the raw image for? The raw image is very similar. All the same effects, it's just one different part to the raw image component that there isn't in the image component, and one change to the texture. In the normal image, we saw we had to use a sprite. In the raw image, we can use any texture. So if our design, if we don't want it to be a sprite and we want it to be just say default, we can't apply this to an image because it's not a sprite, but we can to a raw image because that takes any texture. And this is good this is very useful if you don't want to convert this image from the texture type of the original image, because that can be quite demanding. It uses up extra, it can just create extra size and things like that. So if you don't need to convert it, raw images can be very useful. Say if I go for a normal map and apply that, our raw image, let's apply the design, and nothing much is going to happen because it's not the right format. But it just allows us to use any texture instead of a sprite specific one. And the UV rect, this allows you to change how the image is portrayed. So if I make this, say the width, we can change the width and height of the object within the image. So obviously the lower it is, the larger the image will be. We can change the X and Y coordinate of it. So 1 and 1 will be a 1-to-1 scale. Say I want to make this 1.5, or let's go 0.8 and then 0.8. You see I'm making the image a lot bigger. And now I want to focus on this little corner down here. I can change the X and the Y. So if I do that, and then I can change the Y as well. And then I can get this corner in the middle, and the rest is just cut out of the screen. And that could be useful if you need like something like this. Like this could be used as a little mouse cursor, or a minimize window, something like that. That can actually be used as a fairly alright image for something. and it just saves you having to create loads of different things. And that is it for images and raw images. So to get started, I'm just going to quickly create an image like what we had in the last video. And as I create an image, you're going to see we've got the Rect Transform up here in the inspector. Now let's go through each thing in here and we'll just talk about what everything does and how it all works. So the Rect Transform is basically every setting you need to customize the display of a UI element. So basically every user interface element will have one of these, and they allow you to customize the position, width, height, rotation, scale, all that good stuff of the element. So let's start with the position. This is quite an easy one. So let me just drag our thing into the center here. You'll see our position is 0, 0, 0. If we change the X, you can see we can customize how far along the X-axis it is. So let's say we made that 100, and then the Y we put to 50. The image is going to be 100 along the X, 100 pixels, and 50 on the Y from the center of the screen. And we'll talk about why it's the center in a minute and how we can change that. The Z position, that won't actually do anything if your canvas is in a screen space overlay. If we work in a 3D space, you can see that as we change the Z position, it's going back and forward. But we can just keep that at 0 because it doesn't matter too much in a 2D space. So let me set that back to 0 and 0. And let's talk about why it's going from the middle center. So to do this, we're going to talk about something called anchors. Now you'll see we've got this little square here where it says middle and center. And if we hit on this, we get loads of different anchor presets. We have left, center, right, and bottom, middle, top. We can click any one of these and it's going to set the anchor position to where we've clicked. Now what is an anchor? Well, an anchor is the point at which an element is referenced when changing the position relative to its own parent. So that might sound a bit confusing, but let me explain simpler. So let me set this to the middle again. We set it back to 0, 0 and make this image a little bit larger and change the color to maybe a light red, pinky red. And we'll just drag this to the center of the screen. If we then duplicate this image and drag this new image inside of the other one and make this maybe a light blue, and we'll just change the width and height just so it's a bit smaller, you'll see that now if we make the center top left on the anchor preset, you'll see as we change it, so let's go to 0, 0, you'll see the center of this image goes to the top left of its parent. Now you're probably thinking, why is the center of this and why is it not the top left going to the top left? Well, that's where pivots come into play. We can play around with pivots of an element to change where the center is of that element. For example, if we quickly go top left here, you'll see where we've got center, we're going to change that to pivot. If we now change the pivot and make that 0, 0, you're going to see the pivot on this image here is bottom left, and we want to make it top left, so if we make it 0, 1, it's going to be top. And now if we set that to 0, 0, you'll see the top corner is aligned with the top here. So what is the pivot? Well, the pivot indicates the reference point for positioning, rotating and scaling a game object. Now I know that sounds a bit confusing. We've had to change to the pivot view, the pivot tool up here, and not the center. If we go to center, the pivot will not matter and it's always going to play around with the center. If we leave it at pivot, everything's going to do change relative to the pivot of each element. So if we were to rotate this as well, it's going to rotate around the pivot point, which in our case is top left. We can change the pivot here in the inspector, maybe make it 0.3, 0.2, and now you're going to have a bit of a random pivot, but it's going to rotate around the pivot. Same as it will move around the pivot, everything like that. Anyway, back to this original image here. If we set the anchor position to the top left, that means our position is always going to be relative to the top left. So if we set this to 0, 0, you'll see the center, the pivot is locking to the top left of its parent, which is the canvas. Now what if we want an easy way of setting the pivot to the anchor position? Let's say, for example, our pivot is going to be the middle right. That's a bit more of an awkward pivot to set on here because we want this thing, sorry, let me go back into pivot mode. We want this blue circle to be here. And we could just set it to 0.5 in the property in the inspector. But what if we didn't want to mess around with that? Well, what we could do is when we click this, if we hold shift, you'll see while selecting these, you'll see we get loads of different blue dots, and these also set the pivot position. So if we now click this right one, it's going to set the pivot of our thing to the right and the anchor position to the far right as well. So for example, let's go for the middle top, the center top, sorry. We're going to hold shift, the pivot has been set to the top, and the anchor point has been set to the top as well. Now if we hold Alt, it's going to move it to that position for us automatically. And we can also hold Alt and Shift at the same time. So for example, if we hold Shift and Alt and click bottom right, the pivot of this image is going to go to the bottom right. The anchor point is going to go to the bottom right of the canvas, and the position is going to go to the bottom right. So let's try that out. So Shift, Alt and bottom right, and everything's gone to the bottom right. And as you can see, because the pivot is lined up with the anchor point, the position 0, 0 does actually correspond to the bottom right of the screen. And now everything we do is that far away, these many pixels away from the anchor point. So that's the anchor presets and the pivot and the position all dealt with. Let's talk about the second easiest thing. Let me set this back to the center. Width and height. Width is your width of it, so let's go for like 1000 is going to be quite long, and your height, let's maybe set that to 500. You see we've got a height of a larger rectangle. That is all your width and height is. Very simple stuff. The width and the height of the object. Probably the simplest thing going. Let me set that to, say, let me go to 250 by 100. Actually, I'll just make it larger myself and set that to the middle. Rotation, that's self-explanatory, so that's the amount you're rotating by X. Which, if we were to bring this out to 3D quickly, X is going along sort of, so 90 degrees would be flat, which means you'd have an infinitesimally small view here, so you wouldn't see a thing. The Y rotation is rotating it on the Y. So once again, doesn't do much, it's just changing the width. If in 3 dimensions, of course, it's changing quite a bit. But if we're viewing this from a 2-dimensional perspective, it's not doing a lot. Z is the one we care about. That is your left and right, your clockwise and anti-clockwise. This is the one that's like you're probably going to end up using the most in 2 dimensions, of course. And your scale. So as you see, your X is how much scale it is on the X position. So what I mean by scale, a scale of 1, 1, 1, the width and height is multiplied by the scale. So if we have 2, the width here is 650, multiplied, if the scale on the X is 2, the width is going to be 1300, because it's just multiplying that by. So if we were to set this to 1300, and then put the scale back to 1, it's the exact same as a scale of 2 on the X and 650. And yeah, we just don't need to worry about the Z because it's 2-dimensional, it's infinitely flat, so no amount of Z is going to make it thicker. And there's this little link button here, enable constrained proportions. So if we enable that, what that's going to do is if we change one, it's going to change the other proportionally. And that's it. And that is all there is to this. Need any more help with this, please do ask questions in the comments, but that is everything you really need to know about this. There's a couple of buttons here, blueprint mode, and you've also got raw edit mode, but we're not going to go into those today. You can play around with those in your own time. We've got some presets here. I'm not going to worry about these either. You've got presets for everything, but under these 3 dots you can reset the component back to default. So what actually is text? Well, text is basically an object that displays text graphically on the screen. So we're going to start by creating a text component. So under our hierarchy here, let's right click and hit UI, and we want to add, now we're not going to see text, we're going to see TextMeshPro, which we're going to cover in the next video, but what we want to do is go under legacy and hit text. Now the reason this text is under legacy is because Unity are trying to get people to move to TextMeshPro because all in all, it has more features than text, and you can do more with it. But I thought to learn how it all works, we'll start with the legacy text, just so we can get the basics, and then we can add to it in the next video when we talk about TextMeshPro. So under legacy, let's add text. And here we go, we now have some legacy text in here. We've got a few things in here, a couple of things to play around with, but it's not hard at all. So I'm going to start by just putting this in the center of the screen. If you remember, we've recently covered Rect Transforms. If you haven't seen that video, I really recommend you go watch it. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger, maybe 500 by 120. And we'll go from here. Now you'll see here it says new text. It's really small, but we're going to come back to that. By default, the text is always going to say new text. So let's have a look under our text. Let me close everything else up here. Let's have a look under our text component. So we actually have a text like base here, and this is the text that you want to be displayed. So if we change this to hello world, you'll see down here it says hello world, and we can set the text in here. Now we can also script text. I'm not going to cover scripting in this series because obviously it's a bit more advanced. Not every widget, this is just pure UI. But to change it within code, you would use something like, you would reference the text, use .text to set the text. I'll put an example on the screen now for how you would change the text via code. But if you want to learn that, I can do a series on scripting in C# and Unity, but that's not something I'm going to focus on right now, maybe in the future. But if you guys want that, let me know and I can make it a priority. So I'm just going to leave this as hello world, and under character we've got quite a few little options. The font, that is the font of the text. So you'll see we only have legacy runtime. If we want more fonts, we're going to have to add them. So to add a new font, you're going to want the font you have. So I'm going to add an Arial font here. I've got this downloaded on my computer. So if you have a font you want to add, you're going to drag it into the assets, and it'll add it at the bottom. And that is your font. Now I'm not going to play around with these settings. I'm just going to head up to my text, and you'll see now when I click this, I have Arial, and I can run between Arial and legacy runtime. I think they are the same font, but we can change the fonts now. So you can add your own fonts by dragging them into the assets folder. Next we have the font style. Now this is the style of your font, so you've got italic, bold, if it's normal, but if we put italic for example, it will be all italics. I'm just going to leave that normal. The font size is the size of the font, so I can set this to maybe 54, and it's going to be a bit bigger. And the line spacing, this is the space between lines. So if I drop down in this text and add a new line and say hi again or something like that, let me just make the size a bit smaller. If I change the line spacing to 2, you'll see it's adding more to the space in between. So this is just the space between each line. If we have that as 0, they're going to be on the same line. 10, they're going to be very far apart. I'll leave that at 1 as well. And next we've got rich text. Now rich text is a little bit more advanced, but this means that UI elements can incorporate multiple font styles. So for example, I'm going to remove the hi again. We can change the color of one word of the code. So we are going to come to the color. There's color down here. Well, if we change this, it changes the whole entire text to that color. So for example, if I make that yellow, all the text changes to yellow. But if we want to change just one word, what we can do is hard code it in using something very similar to HTML. It's inspired by HTML, but it's not compatible with standard HTML. So it's not quite the same thing, but it's very similar to HTML. So you need your left pointy bracket, your less than sign, your whatever you want to call it. I don't actually know what the technical name for these symbols are. And then color, that is COLOR, equals, and then your color, so I'm going to say green. World, and then at the end of world, before the exclamation mark, I'm going to put that left angle bracket again, / color, and then the right one. And now you'll see the word world has gone green. I can make that blue. Now we've got hello world and it's blue. But if we turn rich text off, you'll see it doesn't do that and it just adds that text. So rich text allows you to incorporate these multiple font styles. And color's only one of them. There's so many you can do. There's loads of different. This is just one example. Next we're going to talk about alignment. This one's really easy. So far left, middle, far right. So far left, middle, far right. And this is so that's your X alignment, and this is your Y alignment. So top, so let me put that in the middle. Top, middle, bottom. So top, middle, bottom. Let's put that in the middle so it's right at the center of the screen. Align by geometry, we're not going to go over that because I've never had to use it, so I'm not sure it really does much. But I'm not too sure. We're just going to skip over that. I couldn't find anything about it either. Horizontal overflow, so we've got wrap or overflow. So if I add loads and loads and loads of text, just like loads of exclamation marks, you'll see it wraps it all, so it adds it to new lines. But if we don't want it to add new lines and we just want it to keep going outside the bounds of the box, obviously if we make this longer it's all going to fit. But if we've got like a set box size and we want it to still stay on the same line, we can set that rather than wrap to overflow, and it will just overflow. And to leave that at wrap. And as for the vertical, so let me remove these. If we just add a few lines like A, B, C, D, E, F, if we truncate it, it's just going to cut any lines out of this area out. But if we change this to overflow, it's just going to overflow them. Best fit is going to adjust the size of the text automatically to be the best fit for the size of the object. So if I tick this, you're going to see this, regardless of the font size, this is going to get bigger. It's going to get the biggest it possibly can get while still fitting in the box, like so. If we made this any bigger, or we can change the minimum and maximum size. So if I said like maximum 80 or 100 or 1,000 or 10, whatever, 100,000, it's only going to fill the box. It's never going to go bigger than that. If I made the max size 30, it won't ever go bigger than 30. The color, we've already covered that. It's just the color of the whole thing. Now if I change this now, everything's going to change but the word world, because we've hard coded that with a similar to HTML language. Material, we've covered that previously. Raycast target, we've covered that previously. Padding, covered that. And maskable, we covered that. So that is it for text. It's really not that difficult. You've just got your text component, so like what text is actually being displayed. You've got loads of different settings to play around with your text, and your alignment, and your color. And that's about it, really. That's all there is to talk about. Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about TextMeshPro. Now in the last video we talked about text, and we covered all the essential features of text. So anything that we covered in the last video, that is the exact same on TextMeshPro. We will not be covering, just for the sake of saving time and efficiency. If there's anything that we covered last video that I say, oh okay, we're going to skip over this, I recommend you obviously go to the last video and watch that. It's not a very long video, but it will just be a good refresher if you don't know anything that we skip over today. So let's get started by actually adding a TextMeshPro into our project. So under the hierarchy, I'm going to right click, and under UI, you're going to see we have TextMeshPro. I'm going to click that, and we get text TMP up here. And then we get a TMP importer. Don't close this because we actually have to import essential TextMeshPro resources. So if we click import TMP essentials, this is going to add the resources to our project that we need to have TextMeshPro. So it's going to be font assets, material presets, all the other sort of like some scripts, things that we just need. I'm also going to go ahead and import TMP examples and extras. We don't need to do this, but it's just nice because it gives us some extra features, some additional resources. So it's just nice to have that, so I'm going to import that too. And now you'll see under our assets folder we have a new folder called TextMeshPro. We don't need to play around with anything in there. We can actually leave that closed. So under our text here, it's basically the exact same. The Rect Transform everything, I'm just going to make it bigger, maybe 500 by 250, and just put it in the middle of the screen. It's the exact same as any other object, the Rect Transform. Now what we are going to focus on here is the text input. So we're going to come to the main settings in a minute, but text input, our text, same thing as normal. We could say hello world, and our text style. Now this is a bit different, but this is different styles that you can use for your text. So we've got normal, you can go to H1, and it's just like it's asterisks and a different color, and these are just styles that you can use. So quote, which is obviously you use it in a quote, a link, title, and you can play around with all of these and just see what text style you might want. They're just some preset resources that we can use. And up here, just above the text, where it says text input, you'll see something that says enable RTL editor. If we tick this, you're going to notice the text just flips, and what this does is when it's enabled, text will be displayed in a read from right to left format. Most places in the world read from left to right, but there are some places where they prefer to read right to left. This does mean we get a little extra box here, a text input, so we can add more text, and it just adds it all automatically from read right to left. What we can do is, if we write normal text in here, hello there, it's not going to do anything because the RTL text input's what's being outputted, but it gives our original text as being the right to left format. So you don't really need to change much with the RTL text. It's more the normal text input you're going to change. But I'm just going to leave that as it was. Okay, down to the main settings now. You'll see we've got font asset. Now this is the TextMeshPro font. And actually TextMeshPro uses slightly different font assets to normal fonts. So you'll see with the extra resources we've got a few different fonts here. But let's say we want to add a font. Let's say we have a font on our computer we want to add. Okay, so I've got an Arial font which we used in the last video, just a basic Arial font. Of course, if you are using fonts, make sure you reference where they're from and giving credit to the author of the font. Obviously, some fonts are open source, free to use, 100% free. Some you have to pay for. Some you can use for free, but not for commercial use. So it all depends how you're using fonts. But I'm just going to use this Arial font here. It's just a default normal Arial font. This is a font that is used basically everywhere. And you'll see if we go over to this text, I can't use this Arial font under our font asset. We actually have to make this a TextMeshPro font. So to do that, under Window, we're going to go to TextMeshPro and hit Font Asset Creator. And now you're going to see we get this little pop-up. Now our source font, so this is the font we've just dragged in, is Arial, so I'm going to drag that in. Now I'm not actually sure where I got this font from. It looks like I got it from ROBLOX because we've got Arial ROBLOX here. I'm not sure if that's coincidence or if I can't remember. I've had this font saved for ages. I think I must have got it from ROBLOX. It's a bit funny. Anyway, your front face, it depends on the font that you're using. You might have a few different faces, but the one I'm using is just this. Our sampling point size, we just can leave that. Don't need to worry about any of these options. They're all a bit advanced. You can change your character set. Obviously, if you're going to use emojis, you might want to use extended ASCII. But I'm just going to leave it ASCII for now. And that's it. And just click Generate Font Atlas. And then click Save. And just save it as whatever you want. And now you'll see that when we head down here, we've got our TextMeshPro font asset and our normal font. And now we can drag the TextMeshPro font into here and we have got our Arial. And that is it. That is how you change the font. You've got material presets as well. There aren't any for this font because I've just made it, but you can create material presets. I won't go into that too much. But what I will show you is if I go and use one of the fonts they give us, so I'm going to use Anton SDF. We can use some of these. So they've got a drop shadow material, which gives us a little drop shadow there. They've got an outline, which gives us an outline, and sunny days, which gives us a nice little sunny days material. Different fonts, like in your essentials, are going to have different material presets. So if I go to bangers here, you'll see we've got more, so like glow, logo, drop shadow 2 pass. I don't know what the difference is between that and normal drop shadow. Let's have a look. I think it's just double the thickness. But yeah, you've got different materials. And I'll leave that as it is. The font style, this is straightforward. You've got your bold font, your italics, your underline. You can have a strike through, so that's a line going through the text. You can even have lowercase, so we say we have a capital. It doesn't work too well with bangers, that's not a great font. Let me change it to like Liberation Sans. So if I do lowercase, everything will be lowercase. If we do uppercase, all letters will be uppercase. And if we do small caps, it's going to work similarly to uppercase, but the first letter of the word is larger. So the capital letters are actually larger, but they are all sort of a capital letter format, if that makes sense. This would be good for maybe titles, headings, but obviously play around with it as you want, and you can have multiple different styles going on at the same time. I'm just going to leave all that off. The font size, straightforward, it's the same as before. There's not really much we need to play around with font size because we sort of covered it last video. What I will do is auto size. This is similar to your best fit. We do have a best fit, I think, down on the material, not on the material, under extra settings. No, maybe not. This is basically your best fit. So your minimum is your minimum size it goes, your maximum is your maximum size. We covered that in the last video. Now, the WD percentage, this is the percentage width that the text will compress to before reducing the size. So say I set this to 50%, it's going to reduce to 50% the width of the text. So if I make this really small, you're going to see that when it gets to 50% width, so it sort of squishes in, it's going to start changing size. I'll leave that as 0, and line is similar. It's just the height that the text gets compressed down to before reducing the size. Now this is actually a negative number. Now I'm going to turn that off, and the vertex color is the same as the color basically. So whatever this is, the color of the text will change, so I could maybe make that a light blue. Color gradient. Now this is pretty simple. It's going to look a bit confusing when you first see it, but there's quite a lot of cool things for us to play around with here. So our color preset, we won't worry about that, but you can get presets. Some are built in here. Look, so we've got dark to light, blue to purple, light to dark green. So we can get a single mode, which is just our solid color, although it sort of works as an overlay. So if I make this red, it's sort of overlaying it on top and just makes it black because it's trying to make a gradient between one color and another color, and it's just not working like very well. Now if we make it a horizontal gradient, it's going to go, I think, left to right, or it will go right to left, but it should be left to right. Yeah, so if we go from white to, let's go green. Yeah, so what it's doing, is it's overlaying on top of the vertex color. So if we made this white, there we go. Yeah, sorry, so if we have single color, red will make it go red. It's because it's overlaying, sorry. Yeah, horizontal, that's just your horizontal gradient. If you have a vertical, it's going to go from top to bottom. So, for example, we can go, let's go from red to a dark red gradient, like that, and it goes down. It's really easy, and in your four corners, so you can have top left of one colour, top right another colour, bottom left a different colour, and bottom right another colour. And it doesn't look great. I mean, it's a nice little rainbow colour. But yeah, you can just play around with these. You can put down the hexadecimal as well. But for all that I'm concerned, I'm just going to leave colour gradient off. I just wanted to show that to you. Okay, so override tags basically decides if the vertex colour should override any styled text. So if you remember in the last video, we talked about a language similar to hexadecimal, where we could make different colours for different text. If we make the world green here, like that, then we can get hello world and the world's green. If we do override tags, it's going to ignore that and just replace it with the vertex colour. I'm not sure it works for colour gradient. It does, so it does work for colour gradient too. And that's what that does. Okay, so spacing options is the distance, the spacing between characters, words, lines, and paragraphs. So if we have a character here, we can change the spacing between each character. Can make it negative as well. If we've got a few lines, so let's go like 1, 2, 3, we've got a few lines here, we can change the spacing between lines, make it larger or smaller. Let's have a look. Word, so we can change the spacing between words. And paragraph, we can change the spacing between paragraphs. If I said hello there, so there's a couple of drops there. This bit is going to be separated, sort of, so each line separate, similar to the line spacing, but I'm just going to leave that at 1 line and we'll settle that back to default. The alignment, dead easy, covered it before. There's a couple, so we covered these 6 here, but there's a few more that we want that there are to look at. Okay, so justified, I'm not really sure what justified does. Doesn't look like it does too much, but the flush here we'll be able to change, so it's like 1 word's to the left, so half of it's to the left, half of it's to the right. If we put hello to the world, all the words are evenly distributed, and we can change the distribution of the words, like the spacing. It's up to you if you want to use this. Then there's one more, geometry center. It will just center it to the middle, if that makes sense, no matter the spacing between the words. So if I change the character spacing, it's always going to be centered to the middle. So baseline, this is where it's sort of sat on an imaginary line which slices the middle here. So if you imagine a line going across the middle, if we made this great, like longer, you could imagine the line going straight across the middle, and it sort of sits on top of that line. And then we've also got midline, which is your middle, basically. There's not much difference between midline and the middle alignment. I think midline might be a bit more accurate, but I'm not too sure. And then you've got your last one here, which is cap line. To be honest, I'm not sure what the difference between cap line and midline is. I think midline, like longer letters, like J, for example, will touch the bottom, whereas cap line, they will go under. There's really not much difference though. Anyway, next you've got your text wrapping mode. We're not going to cover wrapping. We won't cover mapping, because these get a bit more advanced, like mapping here. We've got a few different maps, different overflow, like quite a lot more overflow options from the last time. So we're going to skip over these because they're a bit more advanced. I want to keep this simple without overloading you with information, because there's quite a lot to remember with TextMeshPro. So let's now go over to the extra settings, and there's quite a lot here, so we won't go over a lot. As I say, we don't need to. Just keep it simple. Margins, easy. This is just a space between the text and the border. So if I made a margin like 100 from the top left and 100 from the right, you're going to see that the actual text, maybe 10 from the top, 10 from the bottom, you'll see the actual text is like sort of a border. It's in a border around the main text, if that makes sense. It's like in its own square, and you can just change how far apart from the border the text is. Geometry sorting, we're going to skip over that because we don't really need to know it for the beginning, but if you do want to know, it's the order in which text geometry is sorted, blah 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 blah. You can just hover over it, it'll give you a very brief description. Is scale static? Once again, we're going to skip over that. Rich text we've covered raycast targets, we've covered maskable. Parse escape characters. This chooses whether or not to display strings, such as \n for new lines. So if you didn't know, you could do \n at the end of a line and then do a new line, and it will sort of forget that \n and just drop a new line. It's good for scripting. If you're changing text in script, you can't literally drop a new line in script and it will drop a new line in the text. So you have to use this \n to drop a new line. And this, if you have parse escape characters on, that's going to count. If you have that turned off, the \n will literally do nothing. We're going to skip over visible to sender and emoji fallback support. We'll skip over everything else here as well, because as I say, I want to keep it simple. If you do want to know what this stuff is, so you can hover over it, and if you want more, you can actually go and like look it up, of course. But like once again here, we've got a new style, so like sprite equals sprite asset name. But let's go close the extra settings, and I'm going to look at the material now. There's a couple things, we're nearly there, I just want to go over a couple things here. So under the actual material, we have got an outline. We can tick this and we'll be able to add an outline. So if we can change the thickness, and it adds an outline to the material which is on the text. We can also add an underlay. So, and then I can change the offset. This is sort of like your shadow. Like I could do this, maybe change the softness, and we've got like a little shadow going on here. And the only downside, it's very important to note this, the only downside to this is because this is a material for this font, any other TextMeshPros we make, so if I make a TextMeshPro with that exact font, because it's using the same material, it's going to have those settings. And if you change those settings to 1, so say I change the thickness to be thicker, it's going to change it to every text with that material in the project. That is the only downside to that, of course, but you can make some pretty cool things. Like if we add a gradient, then we can have an outline for the So let's get started by right-clicking in our hierarchy and adding a panel. Now, first thing you're going to see is we've got sort of a grey, sort of like an image here in the screen. If we head over to the inspector, we're not going to cover Rect Transform because we've played with that before. But let's have a look under the image component. Now, there's not much here that we've never covered before, because a panel is basically an image. The only difference is it's sort of like it gives you a starting point for something further. So you'll see it's got the same components as an image. However, this is stretched under the Rect Transform here. So if you change the size of the canvas, the size of the panel would also increase. Now if we have a look under the panel, you'll see that under the colour, the only difference is it's given an alpha value. So this is basically how transparent it is. So if we had another object underneath this panel, so if I added an image here, it's just going to be a white image. Actually, I'll make it blue. I have a blue image under the panel, so the panel, if this is fully transparent, if this is fully opaque, if I put the panel inside the image, you can't see the image. However, if we make this like half transparent, you can see it a bit better. And that's basically what the alpha is how transparent it is. Other than that, there's not much to panels. I don't really know why I did a separate video on them, but at least they're covered now. The only difference is they're basically, imagine them as images, but with like a starting point. So like they're stretched, they have an alpha channel, so there's not really much to it. Panels, they are good for grouping objects. Like if you need a screen or you've got like a scroll rect and then you need a background, maybe you use a panel to group multiple objects together. But other than that, panels are they don't really need to be in Unity because they are quite pointless. You can achieve anything with just images, you don't need panels. Now, what is the toggle? Well, the toggle is a UI element that can be interacted with to give a Boolean output. So for example, when it's clicked once, it will be toggled to true, and when it's clicked again, it will be toggled to false. So it's a really simple concept. You see it a lot in like websites and games where you have, say, graphics qualities. So you might have a high quality, medium quality, low quality graphic setting, and if you tick one, it will change the quality of the game. So let's get into it. So first of all, I'm going to go up to the hierarchy and right click. Under UI, I'm going to add a toggle. As you can see, we get a little arrow here because the toggle has children that come with it. If we open these up, let's quickly break down what the toggle consists of. So it consists of a background, which consists of a check mark, and it also has a label. Now the label is irrelevant, you don't need the label, this is just the text that comes next to it. We could delete this and it wouldn't actually affect the toggle at all. But if I change this to toggle 1, because I'm going to add another toggle later, and as you can see with the background, maybe if I make this text a bit easier to see, and the background is just the image of the background of the toggle. So that is this bit here, this little like box. and the check mark is what we see as the tick in the box. Now you can set this as the image of anything you want. You can change these two images. I'm just going to leave them as they are, but if you want other images, go ahead. Now I'm going to go up to the toggle and let's have a look at the components of the toggle. Now you will see we have transitions here. So we have none, color tint, sprite swap, and animation. None is obviously will have no transition. If you tick it, the tick will appear. All is good. No extra effects. If you have color tint, if you hover over it, you'll have a different color. If you have it selected, it will be a different color. So as you can see, your normal color is the color of the background here. So I can make that white. Then the highlighted color is the color it goes when your mouse cursor hovers over it. The pressed color is the color that it goes for, it like flashes when you click the button, and then when you release the button, it will go to the selected color. And the disabled color is the color that appears when the toggle is disabled. So if I click play and just show you quickly, you'll see as I hover over it, I don't know if you can see it very easily here. Let me zoom in on the scale. You'll see it does very, very slightly go a different colour. Let me make it a bit easier to see. There you go. So as I highlight it, it goes darker. If I make it like a bit red when I press it, so the press colour like flashes red, and then the tick disappears. And if I made the selected colour dark red, you'll see it sort of flashes light red, then goes dark red. So that is the selected colour. And the disabled colour, I'm not going to play around with. That's just the colour it is when it's disabled. The fade duration, that is the duration of the fade of the colour. So once again, let me go over here. You'll see as we tick it, there is a fade there. If I make that maybe a second, make it half a second, it'll be a bit easier to see. See, as we click it, it's a bit hard to see with these colours. If I make that red, there we go. I had to click into the screen. You see, the fade is a lot more gradual. It takes half a second to fade. Next we have sprite swap. Now sprite swap's easy. I won't go over this. It is basically where the sprite is adjusted whenever the toggle is clicked. So you can get your highlighted sprite, a pressed sprite. So if we made the highlighted sprite like this one, the circle or the knob, whenever we highlight it, it's going to change to a circle like that. Very self-explanatory. And the animation, this is where an animation is played whenever it's clicked or highlighted. I won't be covering animations in this series as I want it to be just about user interface, and I want to sort of keep it simple. But if you would like to see a video or multiple videos on animation, let me know in the comments and I'll add it to my video ideas and see what we can do. But let's move on for now. So I'm going to leave that at color tint. Now let's have a look down at the more interesting stuff. So we have the is on. Now this is the Boolean state of the toggle. So if I start with that off, it will start being toggled off. If I have that as on, it will be toggled on. That is simple. You can also use is on in code to know whether or not it's on or off when you're creating a program. I'll show you an example at the end of the video. Let's go on to graphic. So graphic is the image component of the checkmark object. So we'll just drag this checkmark object down to the graphic. And the group, this is the toggle group the objects are part of. Now we're going to quickly cover toggle groups because they're not that confusing and they're quite useful. So if I right click this toggle and click create empty parent, I'll just call this toggle group. And what I'm going to do is add a component to this called the toggle group. And now you see we've got this toggle. If we duplicate it, maybe drag it down to the middle, I'll make this label say toggle 2. And if I have another one, I'll just do 3 toggles. Just make it nice and easy. Toggle 3. Let me turn 2 of the toggles off. So toggle 1 and 2, I'll just turn these ones off. Just so they're already off to begin with. I don't know why one of them's still on. I don't know what's happened there. Now if we go on to all 3 of these toggles and drag this toggle group parent into their group, make sure that's applied to all of them, which it has. Now if we hit play, what toggle group does is it makes these 3 toggles part of one group. So at least one toggle always, or one toggle always has to be selected at a time. You can't have more than one, you can't have less than one. So if I like say I have toggle 2 on, then I want to change to toggle 1, it's going to disable toggle 2 before it turns on toggle 1. And this is really useful for those things like low, medium, high graphics settings, things like that. It's a really useful feature Unity's got built in, and I'd make the most of it. To be honest, if you're going to be working with settings, like lots of settings, toggles, make the most of toggle groups because they're very useful. They also have an allow switch off setting, which if you turn that on, what that does is it allows you to have 0 toggles on, so I can turn all toggles off if I want. If you have that turned off, then one toggle will always be on at a time. As you'll see now, I can't turn this one off no matter how much I try. So toggle groups are really, really useful. Anyway, back to the toggle. I'm just going to delete those now. I'll keep the toggle group just because I can't really be bothered to delete it, but I'll keep our original little toggle here. Okay, now one thing left is on value changed. Now this is where you can assign an event whenever the state of the Boolean value is changed. So if we click add, you get all sorts of little cool things here, and it's not actually that confusing. Just going to leave this in runtime only. I'm not going to play around with editor and runtime. Just leave it at runtime only. So now I'm going to show this example. So in the assets, I'm going to create a C# script. I would just call this example toggle, and I'll just make it output on and off whenever the toggle's pressed. Okay, so I'm going to clear the start and update method and just create a public bool. We don't even need to return anything. I can make this a void, public void toggle. I'll call this. So I will need to get the toggle, so I'll create a serialized field. I call this. So this will be a toggle. Let me add the Unity UI namespace, Unity Engine .ui. Get that namespace in there. Then we can add a toggle, and I'll just call this toggle object. And now in this public void toggle, what I can say is if I want to get the state of the toggle, I can say state, no, not state machine behavior, I just want a variable called state. So var state equals, this will be a boolean actually, a bool. This is going to equal toggle object dot is on. And what this will do is, if is on, as we remember, is our little check mark here. So this is true at the minute. When it's turned off, it's false. I don't know why we can't turn it off because of the toggle group. Fair enough. I'm going to remove the toggle group now, so I can turn it off. And then what we can say is state. If state. Actually, I can just print state, so it will give me a true or a false. There we go. Now, if I save this script, head back into Unity once it's compiled, and create an empty game object with our example toggle script. So let's drag our script onto this empty game object, because scripts always have to be in the workspace. They can't just be in the assets folder because they're not going to do anything there. You actually have to have them applying to objects, because this is an object-oriented language, an object-oriented game engine. So you have to have these scripts applied to an object. Now what we can do is, our toggle object is this toggle here. And now if we go onto our toggle, on our onValue change, we can drag our example toggle script object into here, and under no function, under example toggle, you're going to see our toggle method that we've created. It's in runtime only, so it's not going to do much. So now if we run the program, let me clear the console quickly because I just tested it. There we go. Now if we turn this off, it says false, on it says true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, so on. And there we go, that is literally it. That's a little example on how you can actually access this in script and use this. But toggles, they are very useful. They will come in handy in your project. This is probably the first thing we've covered that is a big game changer in terms of what you can do. Obviously text, yeah, it's pretty big, images, things like that, but this is the first big functionality that is a bit of a game changer. Hey everyone, today we're going to cover what a slider is and how to basically use it and manipulate it. So the slider is a UI element which allows a value to be adjusted between a minimum and a maximum value. So if we go under a hierarchy and right click, under UI we see there is the option to add a slider here. We're going to add that in, and you're going to see we get sort of a toggle which looks like we can slide across a bar. Now under the slider in the hierarchy, if we click this drop down arrow, you'll see we get a background. Now the background is the image of the background of the toggle, so that is this thing here. This is the background, and then you also get a fill area which has a fill object inside. So the fill area is an empty game object. This just contains sort of the dimensions of the fill area. It's just so this fill sort of, because if you look at the fill under Rect Transform, it is stretching. So it's just sort of, so it knows where to stretch to, like the sort of dimensions for it to stretch to. And the fill is like the actual thing that fills the background. So if we was to expand this, you see it fills the background, and it should, I believe, go up to here. And then at which point this image would cover the rest. Because this image here, this handle will come across with the fill. The handle slide area is an empty game object which contains the dimensions of the slider handle. So exact same as the fill area is for the fill. The handle slide area is the dimensions for the handle, because this is also a stretch. And this one just moves across. We don't stretch this one just moves across. Be careful when you undo stuff, because it seems to, because it's a stretch, remove it from its stretch state, so you've got to re-stretch it again. And then the handle is just the image of the handle. This is like, I could change this to a bit square, and there you go, it's a square, it's just the image of the handle. Okay, now let's go to our slider and look at some components. So in the slider component, we have a transition. We've covered this in, I think it was the last video. There was a video we covered transitions. It's the exact same system, so that when you press it, it will go a different color. I'm not going to cover it again. We've covered all these in a previous video. We will, however, look at the fill rect. This is new. So the fill rect, this is the fill object. So that's what's filling the background. So you could just drag your fill in here. Maybe you'd want to have it a different color, so I might have my fill like slightly green. But as long as you've got your fill background in here, your fill in the fill rect, that's good. The handle rect is the rect transform of the handle object, so that is this one, the handle. Once again, you've just got to drag them two in there, easy to understand. The direction, this is the direction the bar fills. Left to right, it's going to fill, it's going to go from the left, and the bar is going to go slide across to the right. Right to left, the bar is going to, if we was to select this, just quickly, it should, there you go, it's going to go from the right and it's going to fill to the left, slide to the left even. Bottom to top, it's going to start at the bottom and it's going to slide up to the top, and top to bottom, it's going to start at the top and slide to the bottom. I'm just going to leave that as left to right. The min and max value, this is once again easy. So the min value, this is the value of the slider when it's at its minimum, and the max value is the value of the slider when it's at its maximum. Now unfortunately you can't have this as a negative number, because if I was to go negative, you're going to see it starts playing up, it gets a bit weird. So unfortunately you can't have a negative. It's literally between 0 and whatever number you want. But I could make this like 10, and now as you see, if I was to make the min 1, but now if the value was 1, would be here, if it was 2, be there, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you can see it's now between a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 10. So that's good if you've got like a value, like a setting maybe, like a audio level. So say you've got a game you have, or an app, you have an audio level, and you want it to go from 0 to 100. The user can then adjust the scroll bar to how loud they want it, and you can have like a percentage here, like in this case 58%. But there's loads of different uses for these. You can have them between 0 and 1. You can have it between anything you'd like. I'm just going to put this as between 0 and 100. And you can make it so it's whole numbers only. So whole numbers is a Boolean state that only allows integer values as an output. So this makes it great for like audio levels. As I said earlier, going back to that previous example, say we have 84%, I think it was something like that. We can't have like 84.6%, it's just, that would just round to 85. And when you have audio levels, you normally just want it between 0 and 100%. You don't want like a decimal of an audio level because it gets really specific and it can make it hard for the user to choose exactly what they want. So having whole numbers is good sometimes if you don't want these decimal values in the slider. I'm going to leave that as true. On value changed, this is where you can assign an event whenever the value of the slider is changed. So we're going to cover that in a minute. But first we're going to cover an example script. So under the assets, I'm going to create a C# script. And I'm just going to call it example slider. And here we're going to open this up. Okay, so the goal of this code is to print slider value and then the slider value whenever the value of the toggle changes, or the slider, sorry, changes. So let's have a look at how we can do this. Now obviously this isn't going to be a scripting tutorial because this whole series is based on just UI, but I'm just going to write some quick code which will hopefully allow you to get an idea of how to get the value of the slider. So first of all, we're going to want to be using the Unity engine .ui namespace so we can access the slider. And up here, let's just create a serialized field. This can be a slider, and we'll just call it slider. Now, we don't need to define it in start, but what we can do is under the not even update, sorry, let's just make a new method. Let's make a public void because we're not going to return anything. We'll just create this and we'll call it public void slider changed. And we don't need any parameters. All we need to say is print or debug.log if you want to be technical, slider value, and then we're going to add the slider dot value dot toString, just so we can convert that thing to a string. I'm also going to put, it's an integer anyway, so I don't need to put anything in there. So what this will do is it's going to print the slider value, and to do that we literally just use slider dot value. The dot, so slider is the name of the variable which is the slider object, and dot value just gets the value of the slider in its current state. Now if we was to save this, head back into Unity, and let's create an empty game object called slider system. I don't know, just an object, because we have to have game objects for our scripts to go on, otherwise the script won't do anything. It has to be on a game object. So now if we go to our slider, and under on value changed, we can click add. I'm going to put this as 0 by default. Drag in our slider system. Under no function, we can go to example slider and select our slider changed method that we've created. Now, if we hit play, you're going to see if I go into the console, so this is where all our stuff will get printed. I'm going to change it a little bit. Oh, sorry, I need to actually set the slider into, so under our slider system, where it says slider, we want to drag our slider into there. Now if we give it another go, we can drag this, and you'll see it's changing as we drag it. So let's say, I want 100%. Let's say I want a volume 100. There we go, slider value 100. Now I want it maybe 25, so we're looking at about here, 25. And as you can see, it's printing. Each time it changes, it's going to print what our value is. So first of all, what is the scroll view? Well, the scroll view can be thought of as a panel that can be navigated using scroll bars. Which leads me on to my next question, what is a scroll bar? A scroll bar is basically a bar with a handle that can be dragged to navigate a panel, basically. So then to link very similarly, so I'm just going to merge them both into the same video, and we'll just get straight to it. So in my hierarchy, I'm going to right click and under UI add in a scroll view. Now you'll see with this scroll view we get quite a little bit of information that's sort of come onto the screen here. We have a viewport, a scroll bar horizontal and a scroll bar vertical, so we can see 2 scroll bars have been added automatically. Now we're going to go through everything, don't worry everyone. Let's start with a breakdown. So under the scroll view we have the viewport. The viewport is an image that will contain the contents of the scroll view. As you can see, we can open the viewport even more and we get a content object here, which this is an empty game object that contains all the objects that are part of the scroll view. So for example, let me quickly add, just so you know what we're sort of dealing with here, let's add an image here and make it red. Okay, maybe make it a bit smaller. Now let's duplicate this, add another image and make this one green. Now let's duplicate it and add another image and make this one blue. Now let's duplicate it and make another. I'm just going to make a few just for examples. This one will be pink, and let's make another, which we can make this one, let's say, purple. Now, as you see, if we was to hit play, we can scroll through these, but there's a reason our bottom scroll bar's not come on, by the way. We're going to talk about that soon. But we can't go past the pink, and that's because the contents doesn't go. You can see our image 4, this is our purple, sorry, which is right at the bottom, but you see the contents is sort of split off here, where this bar going across is. So we need to go to our contents and bring it down. But by doing that, you're also stretching everything that's on here. So we've got to, it's a bit of a pain, but we've got to take all our images out, just drag them above the content, just so they're out of the contents. And then we're just going to drag the contents so it reaches the bottom of all the items. Now we can get all our items, drag them back into the contents. I'm going to move them back up again. Now for us to hit play, you'll see we can scroll through everything and our scroll bars automatically got smaller. So that's what you're dealing with a scroll bar. Let's now have a look at, I'm just going to quickly remove these, let's have a look at the actual scroll bar itself. So the horizontal scroll bar, this is the horizontal scroll bar. Under here we get a sliding area. This is an empty game object that sort of defines the area that the handle can slide across. And the handle is this thing here. It's just an image which is the handle. This is the image of the handle. We also get a vertical scroll bar, exact same, it's just vertical. Now before we look at the scroll view, I'm just going to quickly go over the scroll bar properties. So I'm going to skip all this top stuff because we've covered it all before. Let's go to handle rect. So the handle rect, this is the rect transform of the handle, which is under the sliding area. Very simple. Direction, so here it's bottom to top. We could have top to bottom. We could have left to right, right to left, which sort of glitch out because it's meant to be a vertical. So I'm just going to go from top to bottom. We get a value as well. Okay, now I've broken it. Let me just undo all of that. Okay, I've really broken it. Let me re-put in the scroll view. I don't know why that's happened. Scroll view. Here we go. So back to the vertical one, sorry. I'll just go over one at a time. You'll see, so we've got a value between 0 and 1. So this is where the slider's at to begin with. The size, this is the size of the handle. I wouldn't leave this on 1 because then it's just one massive handle. You don't really want that. Number of steps. No idea what this is, to be honest. I mean, put that to like 7 and see what happens. I've never actually played around with this. Oh, so number of steps is like how smooth it sort of drags. So if you want it to drag in steps, then you can. And then if you have that at 0, it's just a smooth, like continuous smooth thing. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't actually know that. I've never seen number of steps before. Let's now move over to the actual scroll view. So under the scroll view we have a scroll rect. Let's look at each component here, or each property of the component. So content, this is the rect transform of the content object, which can be found under the viewport. Horizontal and vertical. Now these are 2 Boolean states which basically decide if the scroll view can be manipulated horizontally or vertically with the scroll bar. So if we was to disable vertical quickly, or let's go horizontal because I'm not going to go left and right. If we hit play, you'll see our horizontal bar disappears. If we disable vertical, our vertical bar stays, but I don't think it actually does anything. Let me have a look. So if I bring the game here, yeah, there we go. It doesn't actually work. Okay, let me just add an image in quickly, just so I can test this. I'll just add like a quick like pinky red image halfway down. Now, because that's disabled, yeah, so the it basically disengages the horizontal or vertical bar, whatever one you want, from the viewport, so it does nothing. Okay, so if you don't want it to be manipulated vertically, you can disable it. If you don't want it to be manipulated horizontally, you can disable it. I'm going to disable the horizontal one because I just don't need it. Now under movement type you get three. You get unrestricted, elastic and clamped, and an elasticity here for elastic. These are basically, and I also get inertia, sorry. Now these are physics related effects that you can give to the scroll bars that are a part of the scroll view to sort of customize how they interact with user inputs. So let's go for unrestricted quickly. I'm going to leave inertia for now. You'll see, oh yeah, okay, nothing, it's, you know, it's going up and down, great. If we go to elastic, maybe change the elasticity to 1, I don't know. If we scroll, like, because we can scroll with this actual scroll rect here, if I was to go up, you'll see it sort of like goes in and then bounces back out. There you go, it's a bit glitchy, but that'll do. And you can play around with the elasticity to talk about how quickly it goes in and out. Which means with unrestricted, as you can see, if I do this, I can just go up, down, no problems. Clamped, this is basically where it's clamped. So we can move it like this, but if we move it here, it gets clamped to the sides. Inertia, this sort of allows you to play around with the deceleration rate and sort of how it bounces back. And physics related stuff, I don't really play around with these because I've never really had to. But I recommend you sort of create your own scroll view, play around with some of these yourself, because you can't really get good values, you know? It's sort of, you have to manipulate it to how you want your scroll view to turn out. And so there's no sort of set values. I can be like, try this, try that. This is sort of something you have to play around with yourself, because you can do quite a lot with these 4 options here. So you just have to play around with yourself to figure out what works for your situation. The scroll sensitivity, this is how sensitive the scroll bars are to input. So if I made this like 5, you're going to see it's a lot more like if I use my mouse wheel. Yes, so if I use my mouse wheel, if this is 1, it's going to scroll really slowly. If I put it to, 10, it's going to scroll a lot quicker with the mouse wheel. So it's just how like sensitive it is to the mouse wheel scrolling. The viewport, this is the Rect Transform of the viewport object. The horizontal scroll bar is the horizontal, the vertical is the vertical. Easy stuff. The visibility, this is basically what the scroll bar does if the option for, say, horizontal or vertical is disabled. So let's say our horizontal is disabled here. Let's put this as permanent. It's just gone. Okay, if we enable it, it's back on. If we disable it, it's gone. Auto hide. If we was to hit play, it will automatically hide. There we go. And auto hide and expand viewport. This will, I believe, our viewport here will stretch down when it hides. So as you can see at the minute here, it stops like here, our viewport on this green line. It's very faint. I don't know if you can see it very well. But when we play and this button disappears, the viewport will come down to here. And we can actually test this if we put these scenes side by side. Look at our green line when I hit play. Oh, sorry, there it is. And the viewport's gone all the way down to the bottom. So that just automatically adjusts the viewport when you hit play if it's disabled. And the spacing is it's basically the spacing from the edge of the viewport horizontally and vertically, respective to the horizontal scroll bar and vertical scroll bar. I don't play around with these too much because, unless you're using your own images for the scroll bars, it's set at a pretty good spacing automatically. If you're using your own scroll bar images and handle images, you may want to change this. Once again, no good value. Unless it's the default -3 does do it pretty well. But you're using your own, there's no good value, it's just whatever works for you. On value changed, this is where you can add script. We've sort of covered things like this. You hit the add button. You can add quite a few actually, but yeah, you can hit the add button and have a script or an object or something, script called and ran whenever the scroll bars are used. That's basically it for the scroll view. I know this is quite vague, but I just wanted to cover the basics of it, because things like the movement type and inertia, that's where it gets a bit more confusing. It's where you sort of have to tailor it to how you like it. You can't have, it's not like an on-off value or like something where you drag something in. You sort of like this custom values you have to play around with until you get something you like. But hopefully with a bit of a play around you can get a bit more familiar now with the scroll view. I do recommend maybe having like 5-10 minutes just sort of playing around with these scroll views. Now, what is a button? A button is an object that can be clicked to fire an event. This could be anything from source code that's being called to an animation that is played. Literally anything. Almost anything. So let's go ahead and add a button. So let's go to our hierarchy, right click, same old UI, and we're going to add a button, which is under, I don't have TextMeshPro in this project, so for me it's under legacy. But if you have TextMeshPro, you should see it right up here somewhere near the top. Okay, so it doesn't matter that I'm using the legacy, they're both the exact same. The TextMeshPro is just the text inside of it is a TextMeshPro rather than a text. So I'm not going to cover the text because we've already covered it before in a previous video. Go check that one out if you want to learn about the text. But every button will come with a text or a TextMeshPro which displays what you want it to say. So I could say click me or something. Like this is a button. So if we click it, I don't know why I'm so zoomed in, we can make it do something. So the actual button itself is what we're going to focus on. So under the button component, we're going to ignore the image, but you can set this as whatever image you'd like. The button component, we have interactable. Now this is a Boolean state which decides if the button can be clicked or not. So if we turn this on, if we keep this on and quickly hit play, you'll see whenever we click it, it sort of has a little fade there. Let me make the pressed color red or something, just so you can really tell we're clicking it. Whereas if we was to now disable that, maybe make this press color red again, you're going to see whenever we press it, nothing happens because the click me button is disabled. We can't interact with it. I'll leave that on for now because we don't really actually want that. It's no good having a button that you can't actually do anything with. Let's now have a look at the on click. We're going to skip transition because we've already covered this in a previous video. So on click, this is where you can fire events whenever the button's clicked. So if we click the add here, you'll see we can add something. We can add an object and then fire an event from that object. You've got runtime only and editor and runtime. Editor and runtime allows you to test this technically without running the game, but obviously if you go to click the button now, it's just going to select it. So that only really works in certain scenarios. So now I'm going to show you a couple of example scripts because this is all the button is. The button is literally just scripting really. I'm going to show you, the first script I'm going to show you is we're going to print button clicked whenever we click the button, and in the second script I'll show you how to increase a number when the button's clicked. You can make this do anything. I'm just going to show you two example scripts so you can get an idea of how to call code. Of course you can do any code you'd like. So I'm going to right click down in the assets and create a C# script, and I'll just call this button test. Okay, so when we open up this script here, we're going to get a bunch of stuff that comes in automatically. I know it's not a scripting tutorial, but I'll quickly cover things very briefly. Using Unity Engine, we want this. We also, if we want to access the button, we want to add using Unity Engine.ui. Now this is called a namespace. This Unity Engine.ui is a namespace. Unity Engine is a namespace. So when a button's clicked, what we need to do is we need to have something called a method. So let's clear all of this because we don't need any of it. Let's create a method. It needs to be a public method that we can call whenever the button's clicked. So we're going to create a public method, and we're not going to return anything, so we can call it a void, because a void means we're not returning, and we'll call it button clicked, like so. And then in here, what we can do is just print button clicked with a semicolon on the end. And now if we go back into Unity, if we need to create an empty game object in our hierarchy and drag the button test on there, drag the script onto there, because we can't call the script without it being on an object. So now we've got a game object with the script on. We can drag that game object into our little like none object here on clicking the button, drag that in there, and now we get something that says no function. If we click on this, we can go down to button test, which is the script, and you'll see a bunch of stuff here by default. What you're looking for is button clicked here. This is the public method we've just made. If you made it private, you won't see this. It has to be public. And then you can select that. Now if we hit play, whenever we click this button, under our console, it's printing button clicked whenever we hit the button, which is great. Now I'm going to show you another script, if I reopen this, which increases a number whenever we click the button. So let's create, I'll keep that script down, I'll remove this print here, but I'll keep the button clicked. At the top, I want to create, it can be a private, I'm just going to create an integer called number of clicks, and this will be the number of times the button's been clicked. Now by default I want it to be 0, but that is what an integer is by default. If you don't give it a value, if you don't declare a value, it will just initialize it as 0. Now under button clicked, we're going to say number of clicks plus plus. This is the exact same, by the way, as saying number of clicks plus equals 1, or number of clicks equals number of clicks plus 1. These are 3 ways of saying the exact same thing, but the plus plus just means add 1 to that variable, which is all we want to do. We only want to add 1. Now we can display this, so let's say print total times you have clicked the button. Let's put a colon on, and let's add our number of clicks. We need to convert this to a string, so we're going to do .toString with these little parentheses here, and hit save. Now this .toString just converts our integer to a string, because we can only print a string. You can't print an integer, you have to convert it to a string. It doesn't make sense to print an integer. Now if we go back, you'll see, is our button still assigned? Yes it is. Is that definitely saved? Yep. Cool. Now if we hit play, you're going to see when we, I didn't want to do that. When we click this, it says 1. Total times you've clicked the button, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And if I was just to click it really quickly, it will say I'll come off the button. 54. There you go, and it just tells you the number of times you click the button. So what you can do is in here you can literally put any code you want, any code, and whatever code you put in here will be run whenever this button is clicked. Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about drop-downs. So now what is a drop-down? A drop-down is an object that can be clicked to display a selection of possible buttons. The best way to sort of explain this is basically by showing you what it does. If I show you what it does, let me clear this up from the last episode, you will be familiar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, when this has finished deleting, go up to the hierarchy. Still waiting for this to delete. There we go. Right click. I'm going to, under UI, add a drop down. Now I'm not going to use a TextMeshPro drop down. I'm just going to use the normal, the legacy one. But the TextMeshPro drop down is the exact same concept, just for TextMeshPro. Now that we've got this, if I was to hit play, you'll see what a drop down does. Option A, we can select option B or option C. That is a drop down, and you can add more as well. Now let's just start off by going through it. What is it? Everything like that. So let's look at the components that make the drop down first of all. So we have a label. Now the label is the text of the selected item from the drop down. So by default it's starting as option A, because you wouldn't start at option B. It makes sense to start at option A. The arrow is the image that shows that the drop down can be clicked, sort of. That's how I think it's like an indication that it can be clicked, like this little downwards arrow. If you see that, it's sort of telling you if you click this, it will come down with a load more information. And the template, this is an invisible object, and it's a scroll rect, which acts as a template for the drop down. So if you want more information on the scroll rect, please check out the video I did on scroll views. It was a couple of videos ago, as we cover like completely in entire detail what the scroll rect is there. Now obviously, because this is a scroll rect, we have the viewport and the scroll bar. Once again, not going to cover them. The only thing you need to know is the item. The item is the template for the toggle of each item of the drop down. This can be edited by your liking, by changing the font, the color, stuff like that. So if we was to quickly make this visible, don't worry about the sizing of it, it will do it all automatically. We see our item here. We could change the item background, we could change the color of the background if we wanted. We could maybe we'll leave the check mark, but the label I'm just going to leave the same, but we could change the color, for example, and then when we hit play, all our options have that background color. And you can just customize with one template how each item will look. So if you do this to one, it will do it to every single one. If that makes sense. The template is duplicated with each item you define automatically, and it's placed into the rect, so you don't have to manually keep adding items. We'll discuss the process of defining items shortly, but when you do add more items, more options, so option D and E, it'll automatically put them into the rect for you, so you don't need to do anything. Now let's go to the actual drop down. We've got quite a lot to cover here. I'll just quickly go over the definition of everything, maybe show you some examples, and we'll go from there. So, skipping all this because we covered it before, the template. The template is the Rect Transform of the template game object that's found in the drop down. So this is the Rect Transform of, if we open this, the template here. So we'll drag that into the template. The caption text, this is the label text that is found in the drop down. So literally the text is called label. We'll drag that in there. And the caption image. Now, let's say you've got a language selection, so you want to do a drop down between English, French, Spanish. You would and you say you wanted like the country's maybe you wanted that country's flag next to the option. If so, then you'd add images. The item text, this is the item label text on the template item. So if we open the template, you'll see we've got item label here. We'll drag that into item text. And item image, again, that's if you've got an image that you want to use. I'm not going to go into too much detail with the whole images because that is sort of a video on its own, really, because it can get a bit confusing with adding like loads of like different images to each item. So it's sort of a video on its own. If you want to see that, let me know and I can make a video on it. But for now, I'll just cover sort of all the main components of this drop down, and then if you want to see that, I can make a video on it. The value is an integer value that holds the index of the item selected. So if I was to show you this now quickly, option A, if we go, our value is 0. Option B, the value is 1, and option C, the value is 2. A is 0 again. So it sort of goes in numerical ascending order as you go down the list. And this is what you'd use in script to make different options do different things. The alpha fade speed is basically how fast the drop down fades when opening it and when selecting an item. So if I put this at a whole second, you'll see that when I open it, it takes ages to fade in, and when I select an option, it takes ages to fade out. Now options, this is where you can define and add items to the rect like we talked about earlier. So let's say I wanted to add an option D, I'd go for option D, and I could add a sprite to it if I wanted. Let's go for, again, images and stuff like that. This is where you can add images to your drop downs. Option E, and now if we was to hit play, we'd have 5 options. There you go, A, B, C, D, E. And you could just make these like languages, just whatever you want your drop down to be. And on value change, this is where you can assign events whenever the integer value of the drop downs change. This value we talked about up here. We've covered stuff similar to this in previous videos, so if we clicked add, we can add a script, put that on an object, put the object in, assign a function to it, all that good stuff. Anyway, I'm not going to cover script for this because we have sort of done it enough already. What you would do, so you'd make your function, maybe do a switch case or whatever, you'd make your function, as we've done in the previous videos, your method, and then you'd just do your drop down component dot value to get the value of the drop down component. I won't do an example script because I think you've done enough of those. But that is basically it for the drop down. Obviously there is more with the whole images, but I'm not going to get into them because I don't have any images prepared and I don't want to make the video longer than it needs to be. But what you could do is basically under your drop down here, so you'd have to add a caption image. So where you've got your label, your arrow, you'd add an image and assign that, like a sort of a template image or an image for option A, whatever. Actually, yeah, it'd be an image for option A. And then you'd, under your item, you'd add an item image and drag that into item image. And then for each option, you'd give that its own sprite, so then it could set those images to the sprite of that option, if that makes sense. It's not too complicated. I just don't have loads of images prepared to play around with it, and I didn't want to make the video really long by showing you like loads of examples. If you want a specific video on that, let me know, but that is the basics of it. You're just creating a couple images, assigning them to some options, and it'll do the rest for you. An input field is an entry box that the user can type into. It's that easy. So let's just go and add one to our hierarchy quickly, and then we'll go and talk about it. So under the hierarchy, I'm going to right click. Under UI, I'm going to go to legacy and hit input field, but feel free to use the TextMeshPro input field, which is this one here. The only reason I'm not going to use TextMeshPro is just because it's a lot more options, not in the input field itself, but with the text. There's loads more options, and we have covered TextMeshPro. I think it was the second video we did, or one of the first few videos. Go check that one out if you want to cover TextMeshPro. It's in the playlist. So I'm going to skip over that and just go to the legacy input field. They are the exact same concept. Of the actual input field itself has the exact same options. So with this input field, you'll see we've got ourselves inside a placeholder and a text. The placeholder is the placeholder text that appears before the user starts typing. So here it says enter text. So if I quickly show you what that looks like, it says enter text, and as soon as I start typing, it starts appearing what I'm typing. And then you'll be able to hit enter and do something with it. We'll cover some example scripts towards the end of the video as well. The text, this is the text that the user has typed. So if I hit play again, and if I select this text, you'll see under the text component here, as I'm typing in, it's updating. Okay, I've got caps lock on, that's helpful. It's updating it into this text component. Now let's talk about the actual input field itself, because we know that the placeholder and the text are both just text objects. We can now move on to the input field. So there's quite a bit here. I'm going to cover over all this beginning stuff because we've covered it plenty of times before. Text component. Now this is the text game object. That's a child of the input field. So that is what the user is typing in. We would just drag that onto this text component like so. The text is very similar. It's linked to the text component. It's the text that the user has typed. This is the text of the text component. You can set a predefined text for the input field here. So I could say, let's say I wanted the input field to say something. Let's say I wanted it to say hello world, right? This now means that when I press play, by default it's already got text inside of it, and we can clear it and type again, and if we clear it completely, our placeholder's there. So this does actually allow us to have text already, but that's the exact same as typing hello world into our text component. They are both the exact same, so you won't really need to play around with this text too much here. The only thing this text you'd really use for is to customize what the text looks like. So maybe if we wanted to make it red, we would do that here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it as it is. Next we have character limit. This is the maximum number of characters the user can type. You would leave this as 0 for no limit, but if we set this as 6, you would see that when we hit play, if I start typing hello world, I can't go above 6 characters. So this just caps how many characters you can actually type. But if you don't want a limit, just leave it at 0. Next we have content type. Now this is the sort of the category of data that the input field expects. So we have standard, which is sort of like a string, whatever really. Auto corrected, integer number, decimal number, alphanumeric, name, email address, password, PIN, or custom. I'm not going to go through all of these. Custom, you've got plenty of like options to play around with to make it customizable. I'm not going to cover all these because there's a lot to play around with here. But basically, you can make these input fields do whatever you actually want. So, for example, if I put in email address, or let me go for PIN. If I put in PIN and try and type hello world, it's not going to work because it only accepts numbers. And when you type the numbers in, it automatically stars them out. So if I typed 1, 2, 3, 4, all the numbers are starred, but you can still see it in the text component. And then I'll leave that as standard type. And the line type for the standard, you get single line, multi-line submit, and multi-line new line. So single line, that's where basically everything you type's on a single line. Multi-line submit, you'll see when we type in here, let's have a little look. Let me say hello world, and then I'm going to hit enter to submit. You'll see it enters, puts it on a new line, and we can type again. If we then put multi-line new line, you'll see if we type hello enter world, this time the new line is going on the second line, if that makes sense, and before the new line was going on the first line, and what we had just typed was going down. So it just flips the order around, if that makes sense. So this adds a new line. The submit one drops down a line and then uses the first line, if that makes sense. I'm going to leave that a single line. The placeholder, this is the placeholder text. So we'll just drag in, not the text legacy, we're just dragging our placeholder. This would be TextMeshPro if you're using the TextMeshPro. Just dragging our placeholder. Caret blink rate, this is how often the mark that is placed in front of the previous character to indicate an insertion like blinks. So what I mean by this is if we put this at 4, so you'll see when I click in this, the caret is blinking really quick. If we made this 0, the caret stays completely still. If we made it like 2, it blinks medium. And yeah, it's just how quickly the caret blinks. Bit of an odd one, but yeah. You also have caret width, so this is the width of the caret. Again, self-explanatory really. Let's say we're saying hello world, and then our little caret's flashing on the end, and let's make that 4. It's just really thick. Yeah. Custom caret color. This is, if you enable this, you can basically set your caret to be a custom color. Really simple. Selection color. This is the color of the selected highlights. If I made this yellow, you'd see that when we're typing hello world and we go and select some of it, the selection is yellow. Don't like that though, so I'm going to set that back. Read only. This means whether or not it can be overwritten if typed into. So if we turn this on, we won't be able to type into the input field. See, we can't type in it at all. So you would use this if you want the input field to sort of display something. There are scenarios you would do this. For example, if you had like a code that you wanted to copy to a clipboard. Should activate on select as well. Easy. Basically, let me pull this out a bit more so you can see the full name of it. Click on it and it'll activate. Okay, on value changed, this one will call an event whenever the text string changes. On submit, this will call an event whenever the submit button, which is typically enter on the keyboard, whenever that is pressed. And then on end edit, I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure how this one works. Never had to use it, because I think everything you possibly could need is already on the on value change and on submit. I really don't know what on end edit does. I want to just say by the name of it that it will call an event when you stop typing, or click off of it maybe when you click off the, yeah, maybe it will call an event when you click out of the input field, but I don't actually know. So let's go and create a couple scripts. So I'm going to quickly create a C# script, and I'm just going to call this my input field. And I'm going to open this up. The first script we're going to write is going to output the old string was, and then the new string is. So, and we're going to call this every time the string is updated. So basically, if you remember, we're going to use that on the on value changed. So once again, not a scripting tutorial, so I'm just going to make it super quick. I'm going to make a public method. It's not going to return anything, so it'll be a void. I'll just call it output state. And then in here, we're just going to print string has just been updated. Like that. That's all I'm going to print. Let's create an empty game object and call this input field script. And we need to drag our script onto this component here, this game object, and then under our input field we need to add an event to onValueChange, drag in our input field script, and add in our output state. Now if we hit play, you'll see when we type, let's say go in the console, I'm going to say hello. So hello has 5 characters and it prints 5 times. Perfect. Even the spacebar works. Everything. Now let's do on submit. So for on submit, I'm just going to say submitted. It's that easy, right? And for this one, whenever the input field is submitted, whenever we submit our whatever we're doing, it's just going to print submitted. So let me remove that event, add one to on submit, drag in our input field script, go to my input field, and we want to output state. Hit play, and let's say hello world. It's not said anything. Now if I hit enter, it says submitted. So that's that. So there you go. That is the difference between on value changed and on submit. I hope that's clear now. I'm going to quickly try and figure out what on end edit does. I'm just going to print on end edit here and just assign this and see whenever this prints, because I don't actually know what this one does, and I think let's take it as a learning experience. We can all learn together. So let's put in input field script. I'm going to add our output state and hit play. And now let's see whenever it prints on end edit. So I'm going to say hello there. So if I press enter or submit, it will type it. What if I click on it and then click out? Okay, so I've typed blah 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 and clicked out. Is that the same as submitting though? So if I hit submit, it will do it, and if I also click out of it, it does it. What if I go back to on submit? This is actually interesting, right? Because I don't know this. So if I now make this output state, I probably should have learnt this before I did the video. I do apologise for that. Yeah. Now if I type hello world, it's got to be with the capitals really, isn't it? And click out, it doesn't print. Okay, I have to click enter. Alright, so there you go. So the difference between on end edit and on submit is on submit will only print something when you press enter or literally submit the string, and on end edit will call the event even if you click out the box. So clicking out of the box is not the same as submitting. Hope that makes sense. I really do. If it doesn't, leave a comment. I'll try and explain a bit better, but that is pretty much it for what I wanted to cover. It wasn't a really long video, but it was a bit longer than what we've done already. Just wanted to make sure I covered everything. So I hope you enjoyed, everyone. That is the end of the series now. So thanks for watching, everyone. Please leave a like and subscribe, and goodbye.